Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of People in Transition. Today, our special guest, Tania Chomyk. Tania's passion lies in supporting individuals on a self-awareness journey, which is the driving force behind her program, Be the CEO of Your Career.Life. She's also known for her insightful perspectives on career development and her innovative approach to job transitions. She's here to share her valuable experiences and tips on making smooth and successful career changes. Tania, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Bob, for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here and to share some of my insights.
Tania, one of my signature questions is, if you think back when you were a young child, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh, thank you, Bob. That's a great question. Always nice to start back from our youth, because I think many times we need to go back there, even when we are going through transitions, to think of what was it that we were passionate about before we became too adult-like and started changing those dreams. So I guess from the onset, I always wanted to be a teacher. I think it started from, that little girl, whether I was just helping the children off the street, I would help them with their homework. In fact, my father built me a little classroom in the cold room, and there I was able to embrace that real helping role. And so always wanting to be a teacher, I followed my path when I finished college and decided to pursue the teaching part-time while working full-time because I had to pay for my studies. And so this was a way to kind of embrace what my passion was, teaching, and still getting some experience working. And so that vision to be the teacher did come true. It took me a while to get there because I was doing the degree part-time while simultaneously working full-time. And the beauty of it is, Bob, is that I landed actually in higher education. I ended up working in higher education. So it was like a moment where I was studying at the university. At that time was McGill University, where I spent most of my career there. But I ended up working in the institution at the same time. And it's funny because when I was working in the private sector, it's like I knew that sector wasn't for me. And I think when you're in alignment with the things that you want to do, that's when you really realize you're on the right path. So I ended up going to work for the institution, fostering my degrees, both in vocational education. Then I ended up doing a master's in educational psychology, human relations, and family life. And so I was able to really nurture that profession, taking it full circle, and then bringing that helping role into all the things that I do today.
Tania, what does be the CEO of your career life mean, and what's the potential impact on job seekers?
So be the CEO of your career for me stemmed from really taking a much more holistic approach to how we take and make decisions in our lives, whether it's career or anything else that we do in our lives. I see career as more than just a job. It's everything that comes to light. So we bring our personalities, we bring our values, we bring all of that into our career. And for job seekers, I think the most important thing is when we're looking for work, often we're on autopilot. We've either lost a job, we're transitioning to something new, and we just take something without taking that reflective approach in terms of what are the things that are really important to me? Do I want to work in this kind of environment? What do I value? What things do I do not want to compromise? How well do I know myself and my patterns? And so I think when we make decisions that are based on our values, how we move forward in our career is really, really going to make a difference. So it's providing you with a framework, a decision-making framework for life, for all the decisions that you make. So it's really taking that reflective approach into how do you move forward by being the CEO of your own career in life.
Any suggestions or tips that you'd give to someone to really get to know what their values are?
So I think there's a lot of assessments that are out there. And I actually use one from one of the books that I think that whole self-discovery journey really stems from her work, which is Tania Chomyk. She wrote the book Insight. And I've always been on this self-discovery journey. And I think deep down, I already knew what my values were. And I think it's important to not only know what they are, but to live by them. So putting language to those values. And then you really understand if you're not feeling something that's aligned with who you are, then it makes sense why things are not moving forward for you because they're not aligned with the things that matter to you. So values exercises can easily be taken through, even on Google search, you can Google a values exercise. And basically it's asking questions about your past. It's about things that made you happy, things that you were proud of, things that you've accomplished. And sometimes we have to go back to those places to really realize the things that made us feel good and the things that were important to us. And then of course, there's questions that follow that. When you take a list of values, then you start looking at, there's so many of them, right? And I think, oh my God, how do you narrow them down? Because I think you have to bring them down to those super values. And so I did this exercise when I went through my own transformational process, when I stepped off the career ladder and really embrace the solopreneur life. And I had to sit down with a coach and figure out what are my super values. And I have to tell you, Bob, that was not an easy exercise. But when I finally came down to knowing the super ones, which is freedom, creativity, and relationships, I use those now as guiding all my decisions. So I know that if I'm not nurturing relationships on a daily basis, if I'm not using creativity in my work, if I'm not exercising freedom in terms of the choices that I'm making, then something is off. I feel off balance. And so I know the things that I need to do to get back on track. And it helps me make decisions on the things that don't align with who I am because they're not part of who I am. So I think the values is really, really a great place to start. I suggest that anyone take that kind of assessment to really hone in on what is so important for you.
Tania, if you were coaching someone who's just starting their job search, what is the 2 or 3 things that you'd tell them to keep in mind to help them make that search better and more successful?
Well, I think when you're looking for a position, obviously doing some job searching, networking is very important to reach out to organizations that align with the things that you want to achieve in your career and to an organization that speaks to the things that you value. So I think it's important to always have that open communication with people to really do that direct networking. So let's say, for instance, you want to work in higher education, you want to land a position there, then you would want to network with people working in higher education. You would want to network with the folks that you think that you could learn from them, perhaps schedule an information interview and to learn more about the organization, more about how you can bring value. I think when you're doing a job search, it's really important to take a step back and figure out what is it that you want your next move to be? What is it that you want to experience? And if there's a gap to where you are to where you want to be, then what are the resources? What are the experiences that you need to go through in order to get there? So I think a lot of introspection when people are looking for positions and really to look at alignment and also to do that networking with folks who are in those industries who can potentially help you move forward in that job search. And I think a very good way to keep track is to really have this career action plan and to keep track of the positions that you're applying for, looking at the competencies that are in those positions and how would you be able to satisfy those competencies, right? So I think this way it prepares you when you do have that perhaps informational call or when you do have a call from a recruiter, that you're already able to respond to some of those questions, respond to some of those scenarios in terms of how can you bring out those competencies in the work that you do, in the experience that you have. So I think having a career action plan is probably a very good step to keep people on track in terms of what they're applying for, how they can better prepare, and how it aligns to the goals. So always starting with those career goals that you have in mind.
Tania, Mac Pritchard, a career transition coach down in Portland, says that you should never search alone. What does that mean to you?
Oh, I love that. Never search alone. It kind of makes me think about the journey of life. And the journey is that we're not meant to travel that journey alone. And so I'm a firm believer that you need to have a support system. You need to have what I call a personal board of directors. And that means you have your cheerleaders, you have your mentor, you have your coach, you have people in your realm that can help you. And so support you when you're not feeling motivated, guide you when you need that extra assistance. So I really believe in that. No journey is meant to be traveled alone. And the more we surround ourselves with people that can help us, that can uplift us, the more confidence that we're going to have and how we're going to move forward in that journey. Because, Bob, there's a lot of bumps in that road to success, in that career and life road. And, when you get into those bumps, sometimes you need to get back on track. And if you're alone, you're not really able to do that. So navigating any transition, anything in life, we need to have a support system. So the more people that you have sitting on your board, the better.
Tania, you mentioned networking earlier. Are there any networking etiquettes or guidelines or best practices that you'd share?
That's a good question. So the art of networking, as people can call it, I think you kind of have to look at it in a sense where networking is important in a two-way situation. It's not just about what you can get from people, but how you can help people as well. And I think we have to learn to kind of give in order to receive. So whether it's a networking that's done, virtually, if you're trying to do an outreach, whether it's networking in the context of a public setting, it's really important to start conversations by just very common things, learning more about the other people, seeing how you can perhaps help them. And that goes a long way for people remembering who you are and them wanting then to really help you as well. So I think we have to look in a perspective as it's not just a one-dimensional way, it's a two-way street. And that motto is whatever you give, you receive back. And I think that's really, really important when we do networking, even just building relationships, because networking is about building and fostering good relationships.
You'd mentioned earlier as well that potentially someone looking for a job should look at industry groups that they're interested in and join them. And that could entail leveraging your alumni networks and have them help you in that search. Are there other pockets of people that you think someone should network with that can help them in their reaching out?
I think the networking also, so you mentioned, that's a good question, Bob, networking with people within the organizations that you're striving to work for, your alumni as well. But sometimes it could be also networking just within communities that means something to you. So a lot of these non-for-profit communities, like for instance, I collaborate with a community called Dress for Success here in Montreal, and I know they're worldwide. And it's really to help empower women to get back to really dress for success as they get into the workforce. And these are women who are either unemployed or underemployed, and they don't have the means to get clothes, and they don't have the means to really have that attire for that first interview. So Dress for Success helps you, groom you, and also provides, coaching and provides other services to help these women get back on track. So I think a nice way is to kind of collaborate with organizations, community associations that mean something to you, where you want to make a difference. And I think that can open up a lot of other opportunities if we create that space for that giving, again, putting stuff out there, because we rise by lifting others. And so if we can help other people in their journey, then that helps us in our journey.
Tania, what do you think the anatomy of a good resume looks like? You've read through hundreds, if not thousands. What would be the coaching that you'd give someone to help them create a resume that stands out from the pack?
That's a very good question, Bob, because I think that's what everyone is looking for, right? How can I stand out? Honestly, there's so many standard resumes. I do like the shorter ones. So there's a thing about, having a 2-page resume. At the end of the day, I say to candidates that your resume has to represent who you are and what you've done. And if it takes 3 pages, then so be it. But it should stand out in the sense where you should have at the beginning that career profile or that summary in that one paragraph that summarizes who you are, what you've done, your experience, and what you're looking for. And then, of course, when you're trying to talk about the work experience that you've done, when you itemize things, it's not as attractive as summarizing some of your accomplishments, some of your achievements. If you're applying for a particular position, look at what they're looking for and show how you can bring that out in your resume. So I say tailor some of your resumes to the positions that you're applying for, because that makes it a little bit more attractive when they see that you're actually writing to them, that resume speaks to them. Important to highlight, of course, your skills, your accomplishments. I started actually doing some workshops on career visions, and I feel that using visual representation sometimes can be very, very useful. And I actually run a HR advisory committee, and we bounce that idea off them. And one person that I was coaching, he actually presented with his resume a visual of his career vision, what he's aspiring. And they found that was actually very interesting. And it really opened the door for wanting to have that dialogue with this person, because that really much stood out. So I think showing what stands out in your resume in terms of your accomplishment, in terms of how you can leverage the skills that you have to what the organization is looking for, having a nice career profile summary, succinct, and then perhaps a visual to accompany that to go with what you're aspiring to achieve could be something that really makes you stand out.
You suggested that potentially you tailor your resume to the company that you're applying to. So you're advocating to have a targeted resume during your job search and not one boilerplate that you use for everything. Am I hearing you correctly?
You are, Bob. You are, absolutely. And I've noticed that there's a lot of people today that are pivoting from this one linear path in their career. The engineer will still go into engineering, but I've had one candidate who is a lawyer who also has HR background and does translation. So she's got 3 different avenues. So I think it's important to highlight that for sure. But I also think it's important that when you're targeting a very specific role, that you have sample resumes that would speak to that more than the other. Because I think a lot of people are coming with varied experience, and I think it's very useful to include. But some very specific CVs that target the positions that you're looking for would really be much more beneficial, and actually even highlight that. Perhaps I was going to say in cover letters, but Bob, a lot of organizations today are not even reading those cover letters. They go right to the CV. So again, it really depends on the organization you're applying for and what is their recruitment, talent management department, how they manage the CVs and who's looking at them and so forth, because it's going to vary from a small organization to a much larger organization.
You touched on this before briefly, Tania, but I'm just wondering, if you're considering a career change, how important is it to align your personal values and passions to that organization and that role? And how can I find out about that organization and the role and the values that they have?
That's a really good question, Bob. I'll stress that again, the importance of first knowing what your values are and trying to align them with the organizational values. So, for instance, I worked in higher education because I valued lifelong learning. And it was always very important for me to have that experience working in higher education. It emulated everything that it stood for me in terms of being the teacher and all of those things. And what happened was, in moments of our career, we could be aligned with an organization, but we can get off track within ourselves because maybe we're in a position that doesn't necessarily bring out those best skills. And sometimes we can feel isolated. Sometimes we can feel a little detached. Sometimes we could even feel stagnated if we don't align what's important to us and the work that we do with the organization. So the first thing when you're looking at in an organization is you're going to go on their website, and most of the organizations will post their vision, the mission, their values. And you'll start looking at, okay, well, if they value community service, if they value inclusion, diversity, all these things that are important to me, those are the first steps to kind of aligning yourself with organization that values what you value. The thing that gets tricky, Bob, is when you're in that organization, let's say you land in that organization, there are different layers, right? So the organization may have this statement that this is what they value, but the layers in between that, which is leadership, they may not always embrace those values. And this is where it becomes difficult for the employee to then see how do they navigate this, because they still want to stay in the organization, but maybe the layers are not allowing them to kind of feel those values. And maybe the work that they're doing is no longer aligned with their value of being curious, of learning and growing. And so when I go back to my experience at the university, hence I stayed there for 30 years because the fundamental values of the institution and mine still aligned, didn't change. But I had to shift within the organization movements that I made, leaving one job over the other, because I had to align with my own personality, which is I can easily get bored sometimes with the work that I'm doing. I need to be stimulated. I need to bring out the qualities that I'm good at. And if I'm not able to do that in the work that I was doing, then I needed to pivot. I needed to change. But the overall institution was still very much aligned with who I was. So sometimes it's about navigating within that becomes really, really important to still nurturing who you are and staying aligned with the overall culture of the organization.
After the COVID pandemic, and oftentimes just life in general, people end up with gaps in their work history. How do you coach your clients or friends to handle those gaps as they're transitioning between jobs?
Thank you, Bob. That's a really good question. And it's something that's come up lately. People have been asking about that, the importance of actually vocalizing and talking about the gaps, because I remember in the earlier years, no one would really want to mention anything about gaps because it was frowned upon. But today, Bob, as I speak to HR recruiters, they're actually very interested in learning about the gap because it adds value to you as a person. So if your gap was because you took 6 months off to care for someone, or you took 6 months off because you wanted to take further courses and go in a different direction, that's all part of who you are as an individual. And you come as your whole self when you come to work. It's not that you wear different hats anymore. And I think it's really important to show those gaps. And now more and more I'm seeing them, and I'm hearing from HR recruiters that it's very fine to have them there. In fact, they're even curious to learn about what was the gap from and what did you learn from it. So I actually say embrace those gaps because they make you who you are, and it's all part of your journey.
Tania, what are you hearing that is important for a job seeker to keep in mind to be as effective as possible in their interview process when they're really sitting down with that hiring manager and answering the questions that are being posed to them? Any tips or techniques there?
Well, I think the tip and technique, Bob, I'm going to go back to my earlier question. If candidates have prepared this career action plan, so what happens there is that if you can look at 10 standard competencies that most employers are looking for. And I'm talking more about the soft skills because the technical skills are something that can be learned, and that's probably something you've already gotten training on. But the soft skills, the interpersonal skills, the communication skills, the decision making, dealing with ambiguity, agility, all of those competencies, I would suggest that you write down a scenario that you've been able to demonstrate that competency. And if you have these already written in advance, it makes it easier to address those questions in the interview because it's going to come to you. So it's kind of that, even that STAR model, I guess, when it comes to interviewing. S is the situation, T is what was the task, A is what was the action you took, and R, what was the result. That also helps in those scenario questions when you have to bring up an example of something that you have to address in order to satisfy or to show that you demonstrated that competency well. So I think preparing in advance, understanding how you can bring out those competencies, showing these examples, using the STAR model will help prepare you in the interview, because recruiters will ask standard questions and they'll always say they can tell the ones that are more prepared for the interview and those that aren't. If you haven't done the research for the company, you haven't really looked at the company website to understand their operations, your role within that structure, that's very obvious. So I say it's really, really important to do that work because it's going to pay off in the interview.
Tania, any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who is going through their job search?
Yes, I have a couple of books, Bob. And again, it's not so much about how can I make my CV better? What is it that I need to do in my cover letter? Not so much the tangible things, because I think there's a lot of resources out there. And I remember one participant said to me, I don't need anyone to give me more advice in terms of how to do my LinkedIn profile. I need someone to help me navigate this journey. And so I think a couple of books to help. And I think assessments are really, really helpful to understand your character strengths, to understand the work that makes you come alive. So one of the books that I really like is Insight by Tania Chomyk. And that pretty much is, to me, that Bible of self-awareness. That's where you really, really learn a lot about yourself and the things that are important to you, the things that matter to you, the impact that you want to make. And I think when it comes back to the self, everything starts with who you are. I always say you're an individual before anything else. And so it's really important to have that understanding. So Insight by Tania Chomyk. Transitions, one of my favorite books is by William Bridges, Making Sense of Life's Changes, because, there's always going to be that ending, and ending is really, every transition begins with one, right? So something has happened in your life, in your career, that ended, and now you have to navigate that. So you kind of are reinventing yourself, reorienting yourself, and then for that new beginning. So that's a really good book. And I also like Sparked by Jonathan Fields. That talks about discovering your unique imprint for work that makes you come alive. And I think that, for me, that's assessment. When I did that and I realized my spark type, it's like your DNA for work. So I think as people are going through the job search, to really take an introspective look into who they are, into what really matters to them and what work makes them come alive. Because in the end, you want to do something that excites you and not drains you. So I think these books are really great resources for that.
Tania, we covered so much useful information to help someone find a job easier and faster. If you could help them remember only 3 things to really launch their career search and keep it going effectively, what would the 3 things be that you would want them to remember?
The 3 things I would want them to remember. So I'm going to take a holistic approach to answering this question, and to say that to gain that clarity, to design your desired outcomes. So design a digital image of your career and vision. Start with that design. And then the second thing is establish a timeline that's going to keep you accountable for achieving some of those things that you have put on your vision, whether it's related to career or any other aspect of your wheel of life. And align your vision with your values and your priorities. And when you have those 3 things, that's going to be your motivation to keep going. It's going to give you the confidence to keep moving forward. So also, Bob, just to understand that we've got to accept the reality and know that every transition is temporary and it's a journey. So be patient with yourself and enjoy the ride.
Tania, I know that you are someone that lives a life that has alignment of your values and priorities. And I know that you help people find that for themselves. On behalf of all of them, I want to thank you for your time today, for your insights, and for sharing. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bob. I was so happy to be here and to share this with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.